Cassie had said something about D-Rock being head of Puff security after I had left.
So it meant a lot to me to actually have the opportunity to work with somebody of that magnitude.
What is the job of an executive assistant? What do you do?
Well, the job of an executive assistant is to staff him. 24/7, essentially, he needs staffing.
Puff may have promised D-Rock something to help him get big to that party.
Would go to a hotel room or be at his home, his bedroom, and they would have intimate gatherings.
Cocaine is a hell of a drug.
What goes down when one of the largest music names finds itself confronted with courtroom revelations they never wanted to hear? In today's video, we're exploring the shocking testimony of Diddy's former assistant, the eye-popping allegations of Freakoff nights, and outlandish demands that stunned the courtroom. What did Diddy do in the moment? Stay tuned to find out the whole story as it was happening day by day.
With us at all times. We'd have their marijuana joints on us. We would have the mushrooms on us. We had a kind of a Diddy pack is what they would call it. And we would keep a satchel on us, and that's what we would have in that satchel. They were referred to me as Wild King Nights. And what a Wild King Night was when him and a guest would go to a hotel room or be at his home, his bedroom, and they would have intimate gatherings. I would have to go and prep that hotel room, which consisted of baby oil, Astroglide, candles, incense, liquor, lights, tons of toiletries, drugs. I had no idea that he had this other side to him. And when I started to get exposed to his lifestyle, I started to really realize, this guy has an addiction. It's not just, once every few weeks, it's every day, every hour.
Hey, yo, Phil, can y'all come straighten it up over here? Not looking luxurious.
The personal assistant also became the personal maid. Diddy's sex parties meant hotel rooms were often trashed. Phil was expected to get his hands dirty cleaning up, with the priority being to ensure no evidence was left behind. No secrets could ever escape.
Initially, when you walk in, you have to start to clean up the mess and the records that's left from the room. And that's the alcohol that's halfway open. Some bottles are cracked, glasses are cracked. There's baby oil everywhere on the floors in the bathroom. There's lube everywhere, half open, some of it oozing off the sides. And you have to get all that stuff, clean it up. Luckily, I would wear even a mask and I would wear gloves because it was disgusting.
Phil, what would have happened if you said to Diddy, look, that's just not my job, I'm not going to do it?
If I said that to Diddy, I wouldn't have worked there. They would find somebody else.
The moment Diddy's former aide went up to the stand, the courtroom grew quiet, all eyes on them. This was a person who had effectively lived in Diddy's shadow, privy to information that no one else would have dreamed of. As Diddy sat at defense counsel, shying away from direct eye contact, the aide began their testimony, immediately commanding the attention of the room with their firm and clear voice. They weren't just an employee, they were the kind of insider familiar with the rhythms of his existence, from business to personal indulgences. They spoke of their role with agonizing precision, bolstering their credibility as more than merely a witness to the events at hand. It wasn't long before they spoke about what had been whispered about for years, the so-called Freakoff nights. The assistant's voice did not shake as they spoke about the extravagance and secrecy of these events, painting a picture that left everyone within earshot shocked. It wasn't extravagantly thrown parties. These were nights shrouded in extreme secrecy, attended by select insiders, where, according to the testimony, control was everything. These Freakoffs, as they came to be known, were described as complex productions, carefully concocted by Diddy himself. Invitations weren't dispensed lightly, and every aspect, from the guest list to atmosphere, was controlled to strict specifications. It was no normal gathering, it was excess at its most measured. The assistant then divulged chilling demands that, according to them, were made to accommodate Diddy's desires. During these nights, they spoke of being tasked with arranging uncomfortably precise arrangements for these affairs, characterizing.
Well, see, I know two situations like that. See, Cassie told the story on the witness stand about how Puff and her was in a freak off, and then D-Rock intervene or whatever like that, and they masked themselves up in all black, took the guns out the safe, and went to find Suge. You know what I'm saying? Suge even spoke about he glad they didn't find him because a whole lot of other people probably been dead then too, you know, if they would have found him. Now, she testified that, you know, Puff and D-Rock was going to try to, you know, unalive Suge. You know what I'm saying? Now, what I do know this, me and D-Rock had a conversation about why he's so close to Puff now. You understand? And he told me he was in a diner, Mel's Diner. I guess it was probably Mel's Diner. That's one of the diners that stay late open in California. He said that he was trapped in there and he ain't have no burners or nothing on him. He ain't have no guns, no nothing. He said he called Puff. Now, this is a story coming from D-Rock. He said he called Puff and Puff came there. But if Puff would have came in the diner, they would have known something. He didn't come to the diner. He sent Cassie in there with the burners. And Cassie gave D-Rock the gun in the diner. Now, this is coming from D-Rock. The story Cassie told is that it was a whole different story from what D-Rock had told me, because D-Rock said he was in the diner himself. And Puff came down there with the guns, sent Cassie in there and gave him one, and was outside waiting on him to come outside. So that's the story that I knew, and I had already said that and expressed that in one of my shows before. Now, the story Cassie told, it was like she saw D-Rock and Puff both put on black and went to go unalive Suge. So those are two different stories that I know of, you know, one from D-Rock and the one we heard from Cassie. It may be the same story and Cassie just flipped it some kind of way, because D-Rock told me this years ago. And then maybe Cassie just, you know, flipped it in a certain kind of way because she took the gun to D-Rock, according to D-Rock.
The process as dehumanizing the assistant accused their work as making sure attendees followed unstated rules aimed at guarding secrecy, suggesting the punishment for violating said rules was dire. As they spoke of revealing this, there were audible gasps from the audience, and even the lawyers shared nervous glances. The room's atmosphere changed, becoming heavier with each sentence. The judge remained stoic but attentive, scribbling notes from time to time, though some of the jury members appeared visibly uneasy. One attendee, later interviewed by reporters, described the crowd as being on edge, hanging on their words. When specifics finally had to be mentioned, the assistant did not sugarcoat. They talked about an event where they claimed they were forced to broker a resolution between Diddy and a reluctant guest, describing it as not caring how far it went. He'd stop at nothing to dominate everything about that night. Upon mention of this specific occurrence, Diddy fidgeted in his seat. He rubbed his eyes, adjusted his tie, and let out a discernible sigh. It was one of the first visible signs of reaction from him during this portion of the trial, though the assistant went on to share more tales. The tension within Diddy's posture increased, indicating the weight of what had been exposed for now. But the courtroom lingered on the image of one particular event, an explosive secret, revealed one that few could have foreseen. And this wasn't even the sole voice that was set to come forth. There was more yet to come.
Because for some reason, Big had to be at that party, because Puff is the one who, and you'll see in Kirk Burroughs' papers, that Puff is the one who scratched out Big trip from going to London, and then turned around and lied that Big didn't want to go to London, which was a bunch of crap. You understand what I'm saying? Because he asked Clark Kent to go to London with him. He asked Clark Kent to go to London with him. And Clark Kent was going to go to London with him, God bless the dead. You understand? Clark Kent told that story. Now, in this trial, Cassie was telling how D-Rock and Puff was trying to line Suge Knight up. But like I said, I'm not going to get into that right now. I'm just going to get into the fact that D-Rock has been with Puff since Big died. You understand? He went and did a little time, and when he was in jail, he was letting everybody know when he come home, Puff was gonna take care of him. And he became head of Puff security, making sure Puff was all right. Puff also gave him that clothing line, which was Bully. It was Big's ideal, but it was Invisible Bully. You understand? Gave him that clothing line. They was doing a little work, and he was doing the t-shirts and everything like that. And I guess Puff was actually, paying him back for helping him get big to that party. I'm glad Miss Wallace ain't here, brother, to see and hear what we're finding out about D-Rock now and the things that he did and how he was, so close to Puff and doing some of the things with Puff. And it's crazy right now. I'm glad Miss Wallace is not here to hear that because she was somewhat fond of D-Rock.
The courtroom was unnervingly quiet as the former assistant continued their testimony. At the defense table, Diddy sat rigid hands clasped in front of him, his jaw visibly tight. His usual air of confidence seemed replaced with a restrained tension. For the first half hour of testimony, he didn't flinch, eyes fixed downward, his face carved into an expressionless mask. But anyone paying close attention could see the cracks beginning to form, the subtle movements, fidgeting with his tie, leaning forward slightly and then leaning back, hinted at the storm building beneath the surface as the assistant's words painted a vivid picture of the so-called Freikoff Knights Memes began to ripple through the gallery. The descriptions weren't just about lavish gatherings, they dove straight into the troubling demands allegedly made by Diddy. The assistant described nights where secrecy was paramount, where control over guest actions wasn't merely suggested, but strictly enforced. At one point, as the assistant recounted a particularly disturbing incident involving a guest who had been ejected for breaking an unspoken rule, Diddy glanced sharply toward his defense team, his expression briefly shifting to something between frustration and disbelief. The gallery wasn't immune to the momentum of the testimony. There were hushed whispers, with some spectators leaning toward each other, exchanging quick, wide-eyed glances outside the courtroom. Reporters were glued to their phones, sending out live updates as the testimony progressed. Some legal analysts later remarked that the atmosphere inside the room felt intense enough to cut with a knife. One bystander described it as a slow unraveling, a boiling pot ready to spill over. As the testimony went into greater detail, Diddy's mask began to slip. Further witnesses in the room described him exhaling deeply, clasping and unclasping his hands, and looking more visibly agitated. As the assistant delved into specific accounts of behavior they were instructed to ignore or enable, when one particularly unsettling detail emerged, an account of a guest being pressured into compliance by Diddy himself. Someone in the audience audibly gasped. That was when Diddy's composure finally cracked. According to courtroom observers, Diddy leaned over to his attorney with a sharp, audible whisper. Though the words were unclear to those seated in the gallery, his tone carried unmistakable frustration. Moments later, as the assistant continued to speak, he sat back, abruptly shaking his head and muttering something under his breath. The motion was small but unmistakable, a rare and raw reaction from a man who had by then been visibly containing himself for hours. It left no doubt that the testimony was striking a nerve for legal experts watching the case. This kind of visible reaction wasn't surprising. Public figures, especially those used to controlling their image, can find it difficult to face deeply personal or damaging accusations in a public, highly scrutinized setting. The courtroom is an equalizer, one analyst commented. The glamour and mystique of celebrity don't matter when your character is being pulled apart word by word. In Diddy's case,
that's an effed up subject and situation, man, to even imagine that you got somebody doing that to somebody that you supposed to care about and you supposed to be in a relationship with.
Yeah, when I heard that, that was crazy to hear. Disturbing, man.
You can't make this shit up, bro. This is made for Triple X TV. The stories that we're hearing about the things that Cassie has done, and we got these people out here believing that, she made this shit up. She ain't did this with nobody. I ain't seen not one of her ex-boyfriends. I ain't seen not one of the people that she dated in high school or none of that stuff come out and say that she was doing that way before she got to Diddy. So it is disturbing, bro. It's disturbing that he could brainwash her to the point whereas that she believing that she pleasing him and all his fetishes and everything by doing some that she's doing for him, man. It's crazy.
Yeah, she testified that Diddy, he'll rub male escorts cum on his nipples.
Bro, what do you want me to say about that? You know, that's some nasty, perverted shit. You know what I'm saying? Bro, when you that high and you into that, that's the, to me, that's the demonic, bro. That's some old crazy otherworld shit. Excuse me for my language. That's some crazy otherworld stuff that people in their right minds don't even think of stuff like that, bro. People that's not in a whole sense of being perverted, that's triple X type of shit, man. That's stuff that normal people don't even think of, man. How high do you get that you want another man juices rubbed on you after dating ejaculated or comes on your girl? How high do you get for that shit, bro? I always say this. Cocaine is a hell of a drug.
The assistant's revelations touched on areas of his private life that had long been shielded by a carefully crafted public image, and the cracks were now showing. By the time the session adjourned for the day, it was clear the impact this testimony had on Diddy. While leaving the courtroom, he avoided eye contact with reporters and brushed past the crowd more briskly than usual, but inside his reactions had already added an extra layer of weight to the assistant's claims, a hint some suggested of his awareness of the gravity of the situation. The courtroom was still staggered by the assistant's revelations when Gandil, a close friend and former bodyguard of Diddy, took the stand. His presence automatically lent gravitas to proceedings. Gandil was more than your average witness. However, he had been around during the peak of Diddy's popularity and could speak about the sort of access only an inside man would have. While his relationship with Diddy had turned sour years before, his testimony promised to either uphold the disturbing picture painted by the assistant or shatter it completely. Everyone in the courtroom understood the stakes. Gene's attitude stood in marked contrast to earlier witnesses. Relaxed and measured in his responses, he seemed determined to make it very clear, "I saw things firsthand," he said early on, setting the tone for what would be a keen and unflinching description. As journalists scribbled frantically in notebooks, Gann launched into the details of the notorious Freikoff Nights, details that corroborated and even surpassed the assistant's earlier testimony. Gene expanded on how these parties were carefully planned, painting them as controlled chaos. According to him, these affairs were more than mere indulgence. They were designed to preserve power structures where guests were bullied into conformity in the name of exclusivity. What made Gann's testimony so dramatic wasn't simply the consistency with earlier allegations, but the level of detail to his descriptions. One particular episode stood out. Gene described an evening.
But is that what he's doing? Is he running an entertainment and fashion industry, or is he running essentially a criminal organization?
By the way, we have a poll up right now. You can participate in it. Do you think Cassie Ventura was a victim or partner in this? Ready for this? 82%. Well, this doesn't make sense. 82% say yes. I don't know if that's yes to, I think we need clarification. 82% say victim or partner. We'll get a clarification on that.
By the way,
right now.
But that's my answer to that question.
Oh, okay. 82% say victim. 82% say victim. Maybe based on we're reporting on the testimony right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think she is a victim if the allegations are true, but also she is involved in some of the criminal act. I mean, she's getting those prostitutes, right? She's making payments to them, allegedly. She's having them come. So she's involved in some of the alleged criminal activity. And that's an interesting point that wouldn't just apply to her. Other people in his orbit might be some combination of victim and co-conspirator.
But you know what? That video changes everything, because the argument would be, what do you think happens if she says no?
Yeah.
What do you think happens if she says, I'm not in the mood for a freak off tonight. I'm not going to pay the dancer.
I'll be sure he came out saying that Kim Porter death needs to be looked into.
I think that Al being his ex-wife, he have every right, knowing about the stuff that came out about Diddy and what he was doing. You understand what he has done in the past, and people have overlooked it. By him coming out and saying that he hoped that he could get her case reopened. There was a guy called John Paperwork, the Paperwork Party. They would put in an open petition to get Kim's case reopened. You understand what I'm saying? So I'll be sure doing this is showing that, you know, he still got love for Quincy's mother. He still want to find out the truth, because allegedly Kim was fine the day before and the day of her death. And then now she found in the bed dead from pneumonia. That just don't sound right, bro. That don't sound right at all.
So you feel the same way about her death being suspect?
I don't think nobody in America think it's nothing suspicious about Kim's death, bro. If you are rich like that, you could, you know, Kim had, I think a net worth of like, what, 12 million a year or something like that? Kim could have called any doctor to come over and look at her. If she was that bad, you know, she could have called an ambulance or something like that. Everything is suspicious about her death, bro. And I don't think an autopsy was done on her. And if it was a half job.
You personally, right? What do you think happened to Kim Porter?
If I say something personal, bro, and my belief, and I put it on to the public, then I might be like...
Diddy's career has always been defined by power, influence...
When he claimed Diddy personally instructed staff to police strict participation rules, he wanted it all to go down exactly as planned. Anyone who wasn't playing along wasn't just asked to leave, they were humiliated. Gene said the gallery sat riveted as he detailed the intimidation tactics employed to isolate and terrorize individuals at the parties. Diddy, at the defense table, clenched his jaw, but otherwise remained outwardly calm. Still, his shoulders were tense, his foot tapping spasmodically as Gene went on, adding to the melodrama. Gene claimed secrecy wasn't simply encouraged, it was demanded outright. He revealed phones were taken from people at the door and staff were sworn to secrecy about what went down behind closed doors. His words conjured up a picture of tightly closed affairs aimed at protecting Diddy from prying eyes. The prosecution highlighted this point, framing the secrecy as proof of Diddy's realization of how harmful these alleged activities would prove if ever revealed. Gene's choice to testify seemed as much about clearing his conscience as striking a blow to Diddy. He said, "For years I stayed quiet out of loyalty, but this has gone too far."